We are about to reveal one of the most shameful secrets of the Spanish Empire, a story that the conquistadors deliberately erased from their chronicles. How could it be that Spanish forces suffered defeat at the hands of savages living in the jungles of South America? How did a people with no cities, no writing, and no single ruler not just fight, but defeat the best armies of their time? In the dusty archives of Seville, a diary was found that was never meant to survive. Luis de Mendoza, a simple soldier, wrote what the Spanish authorities forbade anyone to believe. The Mapuche didn't just resist. They systematically crushed Spanish forces, burned fortresses, and struck fear into the hearts of the bravest Spanish commanders. These so-called savages humiliated the immense empire over which the sun never set for many years. If Mendoza's records are authentic, they are the account of an eyewitness to events the Spanish crown would rather forget. Today, we will tell the story that official history concealed for almost 400 years. The Inca Empire and the Mapuche. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire was the largest and wealthiest in the world. In just 40 years, its conquistadors destroyed the great civilizations of the Aztecs and Incas, whose territories exceeded the size of all of Europe. The Spanish were preparing to continue the conquest of the South American continent to its very end. This is where one of the empire's most shameful secrets lies. The conquistadors painstakingly erased this story from official chronicles, as they considered it a terrible disgrace. But first, let's go back a little to the 15th century and see what was happening in South America before the arrival of the Spanish. In 1485, an Inca army of about 50,000 men, led by Sapa Inca Tupac Yupanqui, marched south. Behind them was one of the greatest powers of pre-Columbian America, the Inca Empire. This state emerged in the early 15th century and, within a few decades, became Tawantinsuyu, the four corners of the world, a colossal empire stretching 4,000 kilometers along the Andes. It included highlands, deserts, and jungles, with a population estimated at 10 to 16 million people. This giant territory was governed from the capital, Cusco, through a complex system of roads over 40,000 kilometers long, comparable to that of ancient Rome. Along these roads marched armies, runners, and llama caravans. In the conquered lands, the Incas built food storage houses, irrigation canals, and fortresses. The economy was based on a collective farming system and mandatory labor, or meta. This empire was considered invincible, and its army, armed with bronze axes, spears, and slings, was capable of suppressing any resistance. But on the banks of the Maule River, they met an enemy who not only refused to surrender, but managed to halt this colossal machine. This was the Mapuche people, or people of the earth, as they called themselves in their language, Mapudungun. Their culture had formed around 600 AD. The Mapuche had no cities, no writing, and no centralized authority. Their society was organized on the principle of military democracy. Decisions were made at councils of chiefs, and every man was trained for war from youth. They used their geography as a weapon, luring the Incas into swamps and canyons where heavy armor became a deadly trap. At night, the Mapuche launched exhausting attacks, imitating jaguar cries to keep the enemy in constant fear. After a few weeks of fighting, the Incas were forced to retreat. This campaign, recorded in the chronicles as the Battle of the Maule, marked the southern limit of the empire's expansion. The Mapuche repelled the attack and showed that even the army of one of the continent's greatest civilizations could be stopped. The arrival of the conquistadors. By 1492, with the last Moorish stronghold falling in Granada and Columbus's caravels reaching the New World, Spain was on the brink of its greatest expansion. In just 40 years, its conquistadors destroyed the Aztec and Inca empires. It seemed that nothing could stop this wave of colonization. But in 1540, with Spanish officials walking the streets of Mexico City, magnificent Catholic cathedrals being built, and silver being mined in Potosi, Pedro de Valdivia, a veteran of the wars against the Aztecs and Incas, received orders from the metropole to conquer the wild south. His army, though small, just 200 Spaniards, was a deadly machine. It was composed of conquistador veterans with 20 years of experience, new model arquebuses, artillery that had brought down the walls of Tenochtitlan, and cavalry, the tanks of the 16th century. The Spaniards' main weapon was the thousands of indigenous allies from the conquered peoples who now led the way in this new colonization. It seemed the fate of the Mapuche was sealed. By the 1540s, the Spanish had developed a clear system of enslavement: encomienda, mit'a, and repartimiento. But here, on the empire's southern border, Valdivia encountered a people for whom the word surrender did not exist. A people willing to burn their own homes rather than let them fall to the enemy. A people whose warriors preferred death to capture, and who tortured their Spanish prisoners so brutally that they were left as a bloody mess of bones and flesh, left for the Spanish as a warning. Spanish chronicles are silent on why the most experienced conquistador couldn't advance beyond the Biobío River. Why did the civilized world stop here for 300 years? The answer lies in the forgotten pages of Luis de Mendoza's diary. The rise and fall of Lautaro. The fate of the Spanish advance to the south changed because of one young man. His name was Lautaro, in the Mapuche language, Leftraru, or swift bird. Lautaro was born around 1534. In 1546, at the age of 12, he was captured and enslaved by Valdivia personally, receiving the Christian name Felipe. During 7 years of captivity, Lautaro studied everything he could about the enemy: cavalry tactics, following the methods of Captain Geronimo de Aguilera; the operation of artillery. The fort of Tucapel had 6 bronze cannons, and the weak points of Spanish armor, later confirmed by a surgeon's report. In September 1552, the 18-year-old Lautaro escaped, stealing Valdivia's war horse. In December 1553, at the ruins of Fort Tucapel, events unfolded that would forever change the course of the Arauco War. Lautaro, having assembled a small but seasoned force, put all the knowledge he had gained into practice. He lured Pedro de Valdivia's force, 54 conquistadors and 2,000 indigenous allies, into the swampy area of Marihueño. According to the report of the surviving sergeant Gómez de Almagro, which is still held in the Archive of the Indies in Seville, the Mapuche's tactics were merciless and innovative. They not only blocked the retreat routes by felling trees, but also poisoned the water in the nearby wells, depriving the exhausted Spaniards of their only water source. The Mapuche used stolen Spanish horses for feigned attacks, instilling terror in the battered Spanish force. The soldiers were surrounded, cut off, and gradually annihilated. Almost all the conquistadors and their allies perished. On December 25, 1553, Valdivia himself was captured. Although history is silent on how Lautaro met his former master, a 17th century drawing preserved in the Museum of American Art in Madrid depicts Valdivia's final moments. He is shown bound at the sacred Tocalevu stone. His execution, which became a symbol of resistance, took place on January 1st, 1554. Chronicles differ on the details of his death. The Jesuit Pedro de Leon, in Martyrs of Araucanía, 1600, claims Valdivia was tortured with molten gold poured down his throat, while the soldier Francisco de Escobar, in his diary, 1555, writes of 200 blows from a club, or macana. However, the skull in the Museum of History of Chile in Santiago, believed to belong to Valdivia, shows evidence of 7 hacking wounds. The end of the war and the legacy of heroes. Lautaro continued his campaign, but his life was short. He died on April 29, 1557, at the age of just 23, near the Mataquito River. His body was never found, but the Museum of History of Chile in Santiago holds his supposed war drum, a coltron, engraved with the Spanish letters F, Felipe, and L, Lautaro. After Lautaro's death, the war entered a long, grueling phase that lasted 3 centuries. The German mercenary Ulrich Schmiedel, in his chronicle, 1567, described the Mapuche's system of fortifications, which included 12 large pucara, fortresses, a network of underground tunnels. Archaeologists found 3 kilometers of tunnels near Villarica, and signal fires on mountains at 2,000 meters of altitude. In 1641, the Spanish Empire, for the first time in American history, signed a peace treaty, not with a state, but with a tribe. In the document, the Mapuche were recognized as a people, not wild heathens, a decision that sparked outrage among the Catholic clergy. The Spaniards acknowledged Mapuche independence and agreed not to build new forts south of the Biobío, while the Mapuche promised not to attack northern settlements in return. The War of Independence and the Pacification. When Chile began its fight for independence from Spain in the early 19th century, many expected the indigenous peoples to join the Republicans. But the Mapuche remained neutral, and some of their chiefs even supported the Spanish. Why? Because the Mapuche didn't trust the promises of the new government. They saw in the Republicans the same expansionism they had faced under the monarchy, just under a different flag. As the Mapuche later wrote, "We do not know these new people, but they come with the same weapons, with the same chains." The Mapuche were utterly pragmatic. They understood that a change in government did not mean a change in attitude towards them. Their main goal was to maintain control over their lands. After independence, Chile set its sights on colonizing the South. In the second half of the 19th century, the government organized a large-scale military campaign known as the Pacification of Araucanía. This was the final and most destructive phase of the conflict. The military operation was led by General Cornelio Saavedra, who used the latest methods of warfare. The construction of railroads for the rapid deployment of troops. Gatling guns, 2 of which are still preserved in a museum in Concepcion. And especially the scorched earth tactic, or Opción Tierra Arrasada. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed, and livestock were slaughtered to deprive the Mapuche of their means of survival. The survivors were either moved to reservations or killed. The final subjugation occurred in 1883. But this pacification came at a terrible price. According to the 1895 census, the Mapuche population had been reduced by more than 80% since the beginning of the century. This was not just a military victory. It was a catastrophe for the people. The legacy today. The artifacts of this epic struggle can still be seen today. Valdivia's armor is kept at the Army Museum in Toledo, Spain. A map, supposedly drawn by Lautaro, is in the National Library of Chile. and Mapuche weapons are displayed at the Museo Mapuche de Cañete. The last entry of the soldier Luis de Mendoza, who disappeared in 1602, reads like a prophecy. They said I would be their voice. Today, more than 1.7 million descendants of the Mapuche continue to fight for their rights, now in courts and on the streets. Empires crumble, people remain. Today, the descendants of those the Spanish called savages are fighting for their rights in international and Chilean courts. What do they demand? They demand the return of what was taken from them: land, recognition, and respect. The Mapuche are fighting for the restoration of their historical territories, some of which are now controlled by multinational corporations that are clear-cutting forests and polluting rivers. They demand autonomy in the management of their resources and traditional lands. They want their language and culture to be recognized as part of the national heritage and not to disappear. Many Mapuche are demanding the repeal of laws passed without their participation that criminalize their forms of protest, including the occupation of territories they consider sacred. They demand the recognition of their status as an indigenous people in the Chilean Constitution and compensation for the damage inflicted over centuries of colonialism and forced assimilation. For them, this is not just a legal or political struggle. It is the continuation of the very same war their ancestors started. Only now, the weapons are lawyers, activists, and journalists. But the essence remains the same: to defend the right to be free on their own land. The Mapuche didn't lose, they were simply never asked if they wanted to be defeated.